One of the expert panellists that we welcome here to TRT World is Gillian Triggs, the Assistant Commissioner for Protection at the UN Refugee Agency, the UNHCR. Thank you so much for your time on TRT World.
It's a great pleasure to be with you.
One of the things that I have noticed covering the conflict in Syria and now the conflict in Ukraine is how differently the migrants from those conflicts have been treated in the international community. Is that something that the world needs to do better on?
Well, I think every situation is different. Of course, it's remarkable to be here in Turkey, or Turkey, where this country hosts more Syrians than anybody in the world. We've never seen anything like it. Nearly 4 million refugees, generally about 3.7 million of them from Syria. This is a relatively open system, and Turkey has given access to education, to health services, to the informal work environment, so people are protected, and that's the key role. As far as Ukraine is concerned, it's also a massive conflict that's led to nearly 7 million internally displaced and nearly 8 externally into other countries. What is encouraging is that, again, the European Union, with its temporary protection directive, has opened up and given at least a 3-year temporary protection to those people fleeing conflict. So in answer to your question, I think we'd say that there are some remarkable global examples now where responses to conflict, and it's almost invariably conflict, increasingly it will be climate change and resources, but at the moment, overwhelmingly, it's people fleeing conflict. We're seeing very positive responses, and we've seen Colombia, for example, giving a 10-year residence permit to those leaving the economic and other persecution in Venezuela. So we are actually seeing some very real humanitarian responses to these crises.
You raised climate change, and that brings me to our next question. How much is climate migration going to be an issue going forward, and is it something that the UNHCR is now having to formulate responses to?
Oh, exactly, and that's the perfect question, if I may say so, because we are moving into that area because climate and the impact of climate, particularly on access to water, for herds to have access to feed, is leading to conflict, which in turn immediately, of course, comes within the mandate for the United Nations Refugee Agency. And we are now really gearing up to understand the multiplier effect that climate change is having. It has all sorts of impacts: food insecurity, inter-ethnic rivalries, competition over an access to a river, and then ultimately conflict and hence the role for managing displaced people.
Just finally, what do you think is going to be the greatest challenge for humanitarian agencies in 2023?
I think the greatest challenge is really what is the greatest opportunity, and that is we're now working along with humanitarian work with the development banks, with private investors, with the commercial environment, with the big companies and the small companies, because we really see the future as being one that, of course, builds on a humanitarian response. You must give people shelter and water and food and so on. But the real challenge in the next decades is going to be development and root causes, responding to inequality, poverty, persecution, discrimination, empowering women, empowering people with disabilities, with indigenous communities. We're now, I think, reaching out now to a much wider local environment, much greater emphasis on that, but critical is investment in communities to stabilize those communities, to give young people jobs and livelihoods and self-sufficiency.
Preventing those crises before they force people to have to migrate. Gillian Triggs, thank you so much for your time.